So last weekend we launched the month of June with something we're calling the Give Global campaign.
We are excited to spend the entire month featuring many of those that have taken the step to serve God internationally, locally, to give their lives to what He's called them to.
And there's 18 of them, 18 people or families that were sitting right where you were sitting, and they felt God's tap on their shoulder. They're now serving God, and it's our job to support them in prayer and also financially.
And man, when we hear their stories, it's such an inspiration to see the way they've followed God, sometimes in risky situations, and just giving their whole lives to serving Him.
Yeah, this month we're going to feature an introduction to a bunch of them, and here's a few right now.
Hi Riverwood, this is Joy Kerbo from Scotland coming to you. This upcoming couple of months in the summertime we're going to have some amazing family fun day, and then also in mid-July we're having another sports week. So we're looking at about 100 kids over 3 days where we can have some fun with them and really speaking to them about God's love for them. And again, thank you very much for all your prayers. They are definitely felt.
Hey Riverwood, and welcome to Gem Lake Wilderness Camp. My name is Matthew McCloskey and I work at Inner City Youth Alive as their camp program coordinator. For many of our campers, drug and alcohol abuse, violence, and discrimination are a part of everyday life. Pray that they could escape these influences and experience God in meaningful ways through Bible lessons, mentoring relationships, and God's creation.
Hi Riverwood, my name's Camille and I'm with Youth with a Mission in Maui, and so our base here in Maui is actually connecting with a base in Israel. So this fall, September, I'm going to be going to Israel. I can't wait. I just want to say thank you for all your guys' support in the last couple years that I've been in YWAM, and I'm just so excited to see what the Lord does.
So these are just a few of the voices that are out there serving. You can find out a lot more from the others and just about what's going on by visiting our Give Global page.
Yeah, all the missionaries are listed there, a little bit of profile, plus there's this great bar that is able to track our goals, and our goal right now is $70,000.
We consider it a privilege, we always have, to join what God is doing through the lives of those that have followed their calling into this. But we also know that as a church, we're struggling to keep up with the budget requirements of that.
Yeah, so it breaks down to $60,000 for the year to care for all of our missionaries, but we've also tacked on a couple of really awesome projects to this as well.
So we know Don and Shar Epp that are serving in the Philippines. They've been there for more than a decade, and they've recently been impacted by earthquakes and typhoons that have destroyed their solar power system, critical for them. And we know that it's going to take about $7,000 for them to replace that.
Plus we have another opportunity. Our friends up in Churchill have asked if we would send a team up there to run a day camp, Churchill town-wide VBS, and we're looking forward to sending a team up there. It's going to cost about $3,000. So right now we're looking at a $70,000 total goal. There's a card on your chair that you can take a look at. It's got all the missionaries on there, plus a way for you to give, and there are so many different ways to give. But we kind of break it down and say if everybody does something, we can do this.
So we've already had a great start this last week and we're making great progress, but we've got a long ways to go. And so if you want to visit our Give Global page, you can track along just like a GoFundMe page would and even contribute right there.
You know, we're probably not going to see all that we're going to accomplish this month together, but can you imagine that moment where they break open the crate and the solar power system, brand new, is there, or all those kids in Churchill that are going to be able to go to VBS and day camp, or, you know, all the missionaries all the way around the world that are from Riverwood that are going to be receiving our support. But this is who we are. We're a people of faith. We operate in the things unseen, but believe me, we're going to make a difference this month as we contribute to this Give Global campaign together. So on your chair at all of our worship communities is this little card. We want you to take it home with you. On one side are all the missionaries. Put them on your fridge. That's what it's designed for. On the other side are all the giving opportunities, a way of doing this. And here's what we're saying. We're saying if you are in senior high, if you're in high school, if you're a young adult, if you're kind of just getting into the work world, or if you're, you know, a senior or anybody in between, let's all do something. Let's all just take a moment and ask God, say, hey, what do you want me to do with this opportunity? And let's just follow that. We believe we're going to accomplish this, which would be awesome. So I want to invite everybody over at the warehouse and everyone at the fire hall, all our friends up in Churchill, and everybody here at the factory. I want to invite you to get up and change seats right now. I want you to change your seat from where you're sitting right now to a seat sometime 2,000 years from now. That's pretty difficult even to fathom, isn't it? Because, futurists tell us that even if in just 100 years, our world is going to look so different. In 100 years, people will have colonized Mars. And there will be these big floating cities over the oceans, kind of floating around the world. In 100 years, you'll be checking your email with your contact lenses. They're already working on this. Your fridge will restock itself. You won't even have to go to the grocery store. There'll be space elevators that take us up to space and make it far more accessible. We will have eradicated the need for hospitals, they say, because you will simply electronically get diagnosed at home, or you'll inject yourself with some nanotechnology, and these little nano things will go around your bloodstream, and they'll actually check each cell, and if you have cancer or some disease, they'll email you and tell you you do. I mean, it's just bizarre what's going to happen in 100 years. So 100 years from now is hard to imagine. 2,000 years from now is almost impossible to imagine. What might that look like? 67 generations from now. You'll probably be speaking an enhanced language or maybe a completely different language. You probably not only will be living in a different time, you might be living on a different planet. I mean, the world is going to have like a 1,000 different cultural shifts that you'll have to have kept up with, and it'll be 67 generations down the road. So imagine you're sitting there 2,000 years from now, and some tomb-raiding archaeologist back on Earth was digging around and found a piece of what they used to call paper with some writing on it, and it had some words on it, and you, 2,000 years in the future, are trying to understand what these words are. And here's what it says. Prince wore the influence of his hometown and the mark of the king on a number of his creations. Once, while Prince was driving the 494 in his 911 on his way from the Minneapolis to Six Flags in the Golden State, he was listening to Stuck on You by the King. It instantly reminded him of the rise of the 3M empire in his hometown, and that was the inspiration for Sticky Like Glue. That song was used by Cupid to put many a listener on cloud 9, but 3M struck gold when 5 used it in an ad campaign. Now, if you are sitting there 2,000 years from now, 67 generations, 55 million kilometers and 1,000 cultural shifts away from where you are today, you're going to look at that and go, what in the world does that even mean? The fact is there are at least 16 different words or phrases that you would have to try and decipher. 11 numerical digits that in this case are not literal, that have no realm of literal interpretation, but rather are an archetype or representative of something else entirely. So sitting here today, you don't have too hard of a time understanding what's being said because you live in this culture. So Prince, the recording artist, who was influenced by his hometown, everybody knows he was from Minneapolis, and the mark of the king is who? Elvis Presley. He wrote a number of creations because of this. Once while Prince was cruising down the I-94 in his Porsche 911 on his way from the Minneapolis to the Six Flags in the Golden State of California, he was listening to an Elvis Presley song called Stuck on You. It instantly reminded him of the 3M empire in his hometown of Minneapolis. 3M stands for Minneapolis Mining and Manufacturing. It was a mining company that did horrible at mining, but it turned out that it had a research and development department that was fantastic at solving sticky problems, and it became this world empire of adhesives. And so this 3M company from Minneapolis, he's listening to this, and it inspires Sticky Like Glue. The song is used by Cupid to go to Cloud 9. You don't need interpretation of that, do you? You know what Cupid and Cloud 9 is all about, but 2,000 years from now, they're going to look at that and go, who is Cupid? What is Cupid? Where's Cloud 9? Can you live on Cloud 9? Do people move to Cloud 9? They're going to have all sorts of weird stuff, right? And this advertising firm 5 was using this as an ad campaign. You can figure that out. But 2,000 years from now, 67 generations, 55 million kilometers away at 1,000 cultural shifts, they're going to be sitting there, and if they don't understand the language, the nuances, the entertainment industry, the business and corporate world, the idioms that are being used, the symbols and the history, in the 41st century, they're going to be sitting there and they're going to come up with all sorts of crazy harebrained ideas of what that meant. For you, you hear all those cryptic words and you know what they mean. So this is the challenge that we're faced with today. We are studying the book of Revelation, the last book of the Bible. And it is full of symbols. It was written 2,000 years ago, 67 generations ago, a couple of languages ago. So many cultural shifts have happened, and yet we're sitting here reading this, trying to figure out what in the world does this mean. When it talks about, this harlot that you read about in your this last week's homework, who is that? What is the beast? And we're trying to figure all this out. So I think John, who is the guy that's writing this vision down, I think he's doing everything he can simply to keep up with this vision that's being projected on the walls of heaven. Jesus is unrolling this vision for him, and John's writing it down. And many people look at this, and what they see is they see 50 chronological events laid out like a map, and they argue about what those mean. Many say these are 50 chronological events that were all accomplished and fulfilled in the first century. Other people say, no, these are 50 chronological events that happened over the last 2,000 years in church history. And then, of course, most people look at this and they say, well, these are 50 sequential chronological events that form a roadmap of the future, of the end of the world, of what's going to happen in the future. But there's a growing group of people, and many of them have been scholars that have been around for a long time, that are saying, well, maybe not. What they were seeing was John was having this vision, and it was sort of like a Picasso. You have to sort of understand the medium, which we found out was an extinct literary form called apocalyptic. In fact, as I was doing my homework this last week, chapter 16, 17, and 18, which I'm sure you read as well, I kind of had my own sense of what was going on. I kind of imagined that John is seeing this vision, and it's almost like there's a story being told in a ring. And there's characters, and there's beasts, and there's all sorts of fantastical things happening in this ring, and it's a story that's unfolding. In fact, we looked at one of those stories last week. You remember? There's a red dragon, and there's a woman who's about to give birth to a male child, and the red dragon is trying to steal the child from the woman, and this drama is being played out in this ring. But at the very same time, there's another ring going on, and there's another story. It's the same story, but it's different players, and it's different perspective and different symbols. And now you've got a lamb who's got 7 horns and 7 eyes, and the lamb was dead, but now it's risen to life, and it's unrolling a scroll, and every time he unrolls and takes a seal off the scroll, there's these horsemen that come, and there's war and famine and all this crazy. It's the same story, but it's in another ring. And then there's another ring, and John's just trying to write all this down. There's another ring going on over here, and it's got this beast, this dragon that's fighting the archangel Michael, and he loses, and he raises up these beasts from the underworld, and that story's going on, and it's story after story. In fact, I imagine that we've got like 12 or 15 rings of this story circus going on, and he's just trying to write it down. One of the things that leads me to that is that Jesus is seen and portrayed in so many different ways through these stories. In one ring, in one story, he's a lamb that was dead, just a tiny little lamb that is risen to life. In another story, he's a male child about to be born out of a cosmic woman. In another story, he's this mighty warrior that's going to come riding in on a white horse. Another story, he's a lion. I mean, John doesn't mind kind of flipping the metaphors around and just trying to describe what he's seeing. So I think we've got this multi-ring drama that's happening, and he's doing everything he can to write it all down. And it is sensory overload for John. And for many of us, when we read the book of Revelation, it's sensory overload. I mean, let's face it, this is a book that is so full of shocking images and ferocity and color and drama and action all over the place. It's amazing. So what we're going to do is we're going to study today chapter 16, 17, and 18. That's a big chunk to take on. But as we read chapter 16, it was another one of the rings that was being described. And in this one, we got 7 angels, and they're pouring out bowls. And you remember what the bowls are? So we've seen seals, we've seen trumpets, and now we're seeing bowls. And these bowls are what's called God's wrath. It's 7 bowls of God's wrath being poured out. And then we're going to come to this another ring that's being told about the story, and it's going to have this harlot, this prostitute. And she's beautiful, and she's dressed in red and purple, and she's got gold and jewels, and her mouth is dripping with blood, and she's riding this beast, and then the beast is going to devour her. It's like, what is this? How do we understand what we're seeing? So what we're going to do is we're going to do what we've done the last few weeks. We're going to get to work, and we're going to do some Bible study, all right? So I hope you came ready to work today, because that's what we're going to do, and we're going to start in Revelation chapter 16, verse 1. And Revelation 16:1 says this, "Then I heard a mighty voice from the temple say to the 7 angels, 'Go your ways and pour out on the earth the 7 bowls containing God's wrath.'" And as you go through each of these bowls, as you read this last week, there's malignant sores, and these boils, and there's blood in the sea, and it kills everything in the sea. There's blood in the river. There's heat that comes, and the people don't repent. They continue to curse God. And then there's darkness in the beast's kingdom. The Euphrates River dries up. And then the final bowl of destruction is like this incredible cosmic scene of thunder and lightning and islands being flattened and mountains being flattened and obliteration, right? And we're sitting there going, what in the world is this? Well, I think if we were to put one banner across chapter 16, it would have to be the word judgment. This is a chapter about judgment. And if there's one thing we don't want to read about, and we don't want to think about, and we don't want to talk about, it's going to be judgment. Nobody wants to think or talk about judgment, and yet there really is no escaping this. I mean, listen to a few words from different passages in the Bible. Hebrews 9:27 says, "Each person is destined to die once, and after that comes judgment." John chapter 12. "But all who reject me," Jesus said, "and my message will be judged on the day of judgment by the truth that I have spoken." And then Romans chapter 2 says this, "Because you are stubborn," it's a longer chapter, stick with me, "because you are stubborn and refuse to turn from your sin, you are storing up terrible punishment for yourself. For a day of anger is coming when God's righteous judgment will be revealed. He will judge everyone according to what they have done. He will give eternal life to those who keep on doing good, seeking after the glory and honor and immortality that God offers, but He will pour out His anger and wrath on those who live for themselves, who refuse to obey the truth and instead live lives of wickedness. There will be trouble and calamity for everyone who keeps on doing what is evil." Sobering. But I want you to note something. These are not obscure Old Testament, Old Covenant passages. These are New Testament, New Covenant, Jesus, Paul passages. And there really is no escaping this idea of judgment. No matter how much we don't want to talk about it, no matter how much we want to avoid it, how much we don't want to think about it, and how unpolitically correct it is in our culture to talk about God's judgment, there really is no skirting around this idea of judgment. So, if we only have a few minutes to look at this portion of Revelation 16, what can we say? How can we understand God's judgment? How do we reconcile God's judgment with everything else we know about God? Well, I want to suggest 2 points. And the first point is this: you'd never survive without God's judgment. But the second point is you'll never survive God's judgment. All right, so we got to figure this little puzzle out. You're never going to survive with God's judgment, but you couldn't survive without it. So, you'll never survive without God's judgment. Most people that have a problem with God's judgment will say something like this: I don't believe in God's judgment, and I don't like people talking about God's judgment because they're judgmental. And they're bad for society. In fact, they're even violent people. They go around judging people, and they go around and they're kind of aggressive, violent people, because judgment, all it does is it encourages violence, and all it does is it encourages bigotry and all this crazy bad attitude stuff. And so I don't agree with it. I want to suggest to you that actually the opposite is true. So here's what we're going to do at all of our sites, Warehouse and Fire Hall, Churchill, and here at the factory. I want you to do a thought experiment with me, okay? I think in pictures, and so I want to get you to think with me in pictures. So we're going to do this little thought experiment where I'm going to paint a picture for you. You're going to enter into it. You're going to play act it in your mind, and then we're going to stop, and you're going to look around to observe what you see, okay? So you with me? We're going to do these fairly quickly. We're going to jump from one scenario to another. All right, so the first one, here it is. You are an Olympic athlete. Not just any Olympic athlete, but you are a pairs figure skating Olympic athlete. Some of you are swooning like this is a dream come true. Others of you, this is a nightmare. But just work with me, okay? You are a pairs figure skating elite athlete. In fact, you are the best three of the world, okay? And you are in the finals at the Olympics. There's 2 other countries, 2 other pairs, and you're about to skate your final performance. Okay, so the first country goes, the first pair goes. They are phenomenal. They are so great. The second country goes, and they are even better if it's possible, and now it's your turn. And the pressure's on, and you've got to skate, and you're skating for the gold. In fact, they've got the gold, silver, and bronze medals right there. You can see them. You're skating for this. The whole world is watching you by TV. The stadium, the auditorium is full. This rink is full of people, and they're there to watch you. And so you go out and you skate, and it is a flawless performance. It is incredible. It's your very best. You may have even beat the others. So all 3 couples, pairs, are pulled out onto the ice to be given the final score. And they're waiting there, and the cameras are panning their faces. And then they go to the scoreboard. And the scoreboard remains 0 all the way across. And so everybody looks over at the 9 judges' chair to see what's going on with the judges, and there are no judges. All the judges are gone. The whole world is watching this performance, and there is not a judge in the house. Now you tell me, what kind of world is everybody living in that moment? With the removal of the judges, does that lead to societal peace? Is there going to be peace between these couples, these pairs? Is there going to be peace between these countries? Who's going to get gold? Who's going to get silver? Who's going to get bronze? What kind of environment is there? Jump. We're in another scenario. You're now in a courtroom. You're a guard, and you lead in 4 prisoners. You've got a carjacker, you've got somebody charged with robbery, somebody charged with rape, and somebody charged with murder. And your job is to guard them and bring them into the courtroom where they can face a judge. And as you bring them in, you notice for the first time in your life that instead of a judge sitting up there, there's a plaque. And it's an official-looking plaque, and it says this: in an effort to promote greater societal harmony and peace, all judges have been dismissed. It is our belief that a judgeless society will be a healthier and more functional place. It'll be more fair. You sit there and you scratch your head. Oh, okay, great. What are we supposed to do with these prisoners? Set them free? Maybe somebody else. Who's going to judge them? Are the guards going to judge them? Maybe we should just let the victims judge them. Or maybe we'll let them judge themselves. Who's going to determine what is right and wrong and what kind of punishment they should get? Are you now living in a place that is full of more societal freedom and joy and peace? I don't think so. I think the removal of a judge at the Olympics, referees at the Stanley Cup, in the courtroom, it's going to lead to absolute chaos. In fact, this little scenario for me kind of sparked to mind when I read a quote. And it comes from a novel by Arthur Miller, who wrote a book called After the Fall. And he's got this character named Quentin, and this is all I read of it, but it just really gripped me. He says this: my disaster really began when I looked up one day and the bench was empty. No judge in sight. And all that remained was the endless argument with oneself, this pointless litigation of existence before an empty bench. And I thought, oh my goodness, an empty bench. It's ludicrous to think that the absence of a judge would somehow make the world a more peace-loving, law-abiding, fair, and respectful place. In fact, if you imagine those situations, they are going to break out in utter chaos. The world is going to become truly chaotic, extremely violent, completely arbitrary. It's going to be a pointless existence of despair and futility if there were no judges in our world. Now, extrapolate that into global, into universal, into cosmic, into spiritual realms, and I think the removal of a judge, I don't think you would survive without a judge. You'd never survive without a judge or God's judgment. However, let's move to point 2. You'll never survive God's judgment. Now, when I say that, most people go, yeah, I get it, because God's mean, because God's angry, because God's vindictive, because God is vengeful, because God is the ultimate cosmic bully. And I want to say, no. Again, I want to argue it's the exact opposite. Jump. I want you to come to another scenario with me. Now you're on a spaceship, and you're going to go to the sun for a vacation. Literally, you're going to the sun for a vacation in your spaceship. So you're 20 million kilometers away from the sun, and the sun is burning at 2,600 degrees Celsius. It's judging your spaceship, and it's judging you. No problem. You've been found worthy because your spaceship can handle 15,000 degrees Celsius. So you're fine. You continue traveling on. You have been found worthy. However, as you get closer, and now you're about 8 million kilometers away from the sun, the temperature begins to rise. And it gets to about 14,000 degrees Celsius outside, and you begin to sweat. At 15,000 degrees Celsius, your skin begins to blister. At 16,000 degrees Celsius, your clothes begin to smoke and begin to burn. At 17,000 degrees Celsius, the metal components of your spaceship begin to melt, and they form these little hail balls that start falling on you. At 18,000 degrees Celsius, your blood begins to pour out of your mouth and your ears and your nose. At 19 degrees Celsius, all the body moisture inside of you begins to evaporate, and you wither alive. You're experiencing the full wrath and the full exposure of God's judgment. And what does it feel like to you? It feels like a living hell. It feels like you are being punished in a living hell. It feels like this is the worst punishment that could ever come. And yet it's not a living hell. The fact is you are experiencing pure heat and radiation and power, the sheer power and purity of the sun. Your spaceship fails. The sixth bowl of judgment is poured out and everything goes dark. The seventh bowl of judgment comes and it's utter destruction. At 25,000 degrees Celsius, your spaceship and you are vaporized and you disappear. And yet 25,000 degrees Celsius is child's play for the sun, because the sun routinely gets to 10 to 15 million degrees Celsius. You haven't even begun to experience the horror and the terror of what could happen to you as a result of exposure to such purity and power. When Revelation 16 talks about the seven bowls of God's wrath, I believe what is being described in this vision is simply the human experience of coming in contact with the purity and the holiness of God. And it feels like blisters and boils and blood and death and lightning and mountains being annihilated. God doesn't judge and annihilate us because He's so bad. It's because He's so good. It's the power, the ultimate power and perfection of God that we can't stand. Unless you are sun-hot holy, you will be burnt up. And only what is sun-hot holy will survive. You will never survive God's judgment. But that's why I need to share with you some good news. This is incredible. With that picture in mind, listen to these words out of Romans 3. But now God has shown us a way to be made right with Him. God has shown us a way that we can live on the Son. We are made right with God by placing our faith in Christ Jesus. For everyone has sinned, and we all fall short of God's glorious standard, yet God in His glory freely made us right in His sight. For God presented Jesus as a sacrifice for sin. People are made right with God when they believe that Jesus sacrificed His life, shedding His blood. For He Himself is fair and just, and He makes sinners right in His sight when they believe in Jesus. Can we boast then that we have done anything to be accepted by God? No, because our acquittal is not based on obeying the law or how good we are, but it is based on faith. You'd never survive without God's judgment. You'll never survive God's judgment. But thirdly, the good news is that you'll never survive God's judgment without Jesus. But that's the good news. Jesus has made a way for us to have a relationship with God face to face. It's incredible good news. So that's how I understand chapter 16 and these bowls being poured out. They're an encounter with the powerful holiness of God, and that's what's going to feel like, and that's what it's going to look like for those who have not come under the umbrella of grace of Jesus Christ. We got a lot to study. We're on to chapter 17. And in chapter 17, we're introduced to this harlot, to this prostitute. And she is beautiful, and she is dressed in colors, and she's got gold and jewels, and she's riding this beast, and we're presented with this. Now, in our earlier scenario, we know who Prince is. We know who the king is, Elvis Presley. People 2,000 years from now would be scratching their head. Who's prince? Who's the king? Who's the prince? What's going on here? We look at the harlot and at the beast, and we're the ones scratching our heads, going, what does this mean? What could this possibly mean? Maybe you were even scratching your head as you read your homework this last week, going, what is this all about? Well, let's review a few of the different theories of who the harlot might possibly be.
Who is this new bloodthirsty harlot? And what about the bizarre beast that she's riding? If you're not sitting down, this might be the time to do so. You may find what you're about to hear a bit shocking. There's only one empire, one church, one institution that matches the criteria in this prophecy: the Roman Catholic Church.
In spite of what you hear on TV, in spite of what you read on the internet, she could not be the Roman Catholic Church alone, because it didn't even exist yet at the time of John's vision.
And here she is. She's called Europa, she's hanging onto a bull, and the building behind her houses both the European Council and the Council of the European Union.
She is the biggest false religion in the world. She is the mother of all false religions.
Can Mystery Babylon be Jerusalem? That's one of the most popular theories about Mystery Babylon.
It's also said to be a woman with a cup in her hand. Now, I'll have to put a picture up here as I'm editing this, but when you look at the Vatican and look at the Pope, and on the back of that, there's a picture of a woman holding a cup, sitting down. Well, that sounds like Revelation 17. She sitteth, and she has a cup in her hand.
And the city that is destroyed, or the place that is destroyed called Babylon, I believe is the United States.
This city has many peoples, many tongues, many ethnicities. That's why some people have been led to think that perhaps it's America. And even there's a place in New York City that has, 7 hills. And so some people say, oh, this is America.
The woman is also clothed in unique colors.
She has specific colors that are mentioned here, not the color of white anymore. But now we have colors that represent, strangely enough, two things: royalty and prostitution, and specific colors that we happen to see coming out in the historic Christian church later on.
All right, so that sort of solves it. We can just go home. That was pretty clear, right? We all understand who the woman and the harlot is now. Hey, we're here to do some hard work. We're here to do some Bible study. Let's dive back into Revelation chapter 17. Let's try and figure out a little bit of who this might be. Verse 9, this calls for a mind with understanding. The 7 heads of the beast represents the 7 hills where the woman rules. They also represent 7 kings. Then the angel said to me, the waters where the prostitute is ruling represent masses of people of every nation and language. And this woman you saw in your vision represents the great city that rules over the kings of the world. So here we are. We've got this woman who rules over a city, who rules over these 7 hills. Remember, this is a Picasso. There's about 12 rings of story going on all at the same time, and John's trying to simply tell us about this. This is a vision. This is subversive, anti-government, apocalyptic literature. So everything we've learned about this kind of literature we need to apply now. But the 7 hills, most scholars would agree that the 7 hills literally represents Rome. Remember that these 7 churches were being persecuted by Rome. In fact, Rome looked so gigantic, so powerful, that it was just wiping out Christians. And these people in the 7 churches would have thought that Rome was maybe even more powerful than God. But beyond simply representing Rome, I think that there's more to this, and we find this in another verse in chapter 17. It says this, verse 5, a mysterious name was written on her forehead, Babylon the Great, the mother of all prostitutes and obscenities in the world. I could see that she was drunk with the blood of God's holy people who were witnesses for Jesus. I stared at her in complete amazement. And you're probably staring at her in complete amazement and possibly confusion as well, trying to go, what in the world? Who is this woman? And what does it have to do with Babylon? Well, let's take this apart piece by piece. First of all, the name Babylon is not always referred to as a literal city in Iraq. In fact, in 1 Peter, we read this. Peter writes, "Your sister church here in Babylon sends you greetings, and so does my son Mark." However, Peter wasn't in Babylon. He was most likely in Rome at this time. So why does he say Babylon? Well, it basically is a way of saying, you know how we often say about Vegas, Sin City? This is sort of a way of saying, hey, I'm in the center of worldliness. And they just called that Babylon. It was symbolic. I'm in the center of worldliness. I'm in Sin City right now. That's where I am. The word Babylon was often used to represent those who opposed God, those who had no need of God, those who, in fact, tried to conquer God's people. Now, let me take you back to the book of Genesis. Genesis chapter 11, you remember after the flood, all the people are talking one language, and they begin to drift away from God, and they get this idea that they're going to build a city and a tower. Do you remember the name of the tower? Tower of Babel, or Tower of Babel, right? So this tower is going to be their attempt to climb up to God, right? They're going to reach God. And so this is a moment of pride, and God looks down and says, wow, these people have got such nerve, and he scatters their language. But I love this in what's called the Midrash, which is an ancient Jewish commentary on the Bible. It's not the Bible itself, but it's a commentary from the Jews on the Bible. This is what they say the people were saying. God has no right to choose the upper story or the upper world for himself, and to leave us in the lower story or the lower world for us. Therefore, we will build a tower with an idol on the top holding a sword so that it may appear as if it intended to go to war with God. This is incredible. In the first few chapters of Genesis, we find the serpent, the dragon, comes to people and says, hey, you want to be like God? You can be like God. You can be your own God. All you got to do is have this apple and do your own thing, and you can be like God. Now, in chapter 11, the people are not only saying, we don't need you or we want to be like you. They say, you know what? We're actually going to storm heaven, and we're going to become the bosses. We're going to become God. This is representative of a world way of thinking that is without God, that is opposed to God. It's the kingdoms and the structures and the empires and the ways of thinking. In other words, Babylon is equated with, in the Bible, with the world. Anything that isn't of God, it's equated with the world. So, why a prostitute? Why a harlot? What is Jesus telling us about the world? Well, let's think about a harlot for a moment. What we would know biblically of a harlot. A harlot is seductive. A harlot is beautiful and alluring and irresistible and really put together on the outside. She makes awesome promises. She promises to give you the best of love. She promises to make your dreams come true. And yet, when you think about it, her beauty is only skin deep because she's rotten to the core. She knows nothing of love and relationship. She only really wants your money. And she'll use sexuality and intimacy to get your money. Her way of doing business is to lure men away from their wives, to lure men away from their families, and to bring them to herself, and to say, you know what, I'm going to break that covenant. I'm going to break your marriage covenant. I'm going to break your family covenant, and I'm going to draw you away. She is a covenant and union breaker, and she will leave you bankrupt and broken and empty. I think the drunk prostitute, she's drunk on the blood. She has Christians for breakfast. I think she is somebody who is, Jesus is warning us, don't be seduced. Don't go to bed with the world. Don't be seduced by the world. She would love nothing more than to steal you and lure you and entice you and seduce you away from God. Remember in the Bible, harlotry and prostitution and sexual immorality and adultery was a metaphor all the way through the Old Testament for spiritual idolatry. And here's basically the way it worked. Adultery in our world is where you are lured away and you abandon your spouse, who is the only one you are to be intimate with, for another who is not your spouse. And idolatry is where you are lured away from God, the only one you are to be spiritually intimate with, to be intimate with another and to worship another who is not your God. In other words, climb in bed with the world, and you're going to have lots of fun for a little while. But then she's going to leave you empty and broken. She won't be there in the morning because she is incapable of fulfilling her promises, and she will only leave you with guilt and emptiness. In fact, talking about how fleeting she is, listen to this. Revelation 17:16, the scarlet beast and his 10 horns all hate the prostitute. They will strip her naked, eat her flesh, and burn her remains in fire. I believe this is a dual prophecy, one definitely for the churches to say, listen, this Roman Empire that right now is pillaging you and persecuting you and killing you, she's going to come to an end. She's going to be shown for who she really is. But even more so, even more powerfully, it's a clear reference to the hollowness of the world's seductions and promises. So what we have in the book of Revelation, we can look at this as a super complicated, 50 sequential, what does every one of these things mean? Or we can look at it much more simply and say, you know what the book of Revelation is? It's a comparing of two kingdoms. It's a graphic comparing of two kingdoms, God's kingdom and Satan's kingdom. God's kingdom flows from around his throne, and we took a look at this through one whole weekend of teaching. But Satan's kingdom comes from the abyss, from the pit. God's kingdom is ruled by the Holy Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. The world's kingdom is ruled by the Holy Trinity, the dragon, the beast, and the harlot. The beast has a mark. There's a mark of the beast, that you think and you do like the world. But God also has a mark. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, wear the word and the commands of God on your forehead, on all you think, and on your hand, on all you do. And then it speaks of permanence. I love this. Speaking of God, it says, he who is and was and is to come. Always there, always will be, will always be there. And of the beast, he who was, is not, and will rise to be destroyed. Jerusalem heals the nations. Babylon deceives the nations. The kingdom of God is pictured around a glassy sea. Satan's kingdom is a desert and a lake of fire. God's kingdom is ruled by a lamb. Satan's kingdom is ruled by a dragon. In God's kingdom, Christ has his woman, his bride, the church. In Satan's kingdom, he has his woman, the harlot, the world. Jerusalem comes down to earth. At the end, Babylon in Genesis chapter 11 tried to aspire to rise to heaven. Babylon wants to take over heaven. Jerusalem comes down to earth. And then this last one, I realize it's not until next week, but this is too good to just skip over because I just discovered this last week and I love it. So Babylon was literally measured out to be 120 stadia by 120 stadia. If you do the conversion, that's about 23 kilometers by 23 kilometers. It was a fairly decent-sized city, okay? Everybody kind of knew this was how big Babylon was, 120 stadia by 120 stadia. Later on, God is doing this picture to tell John how great the kingdom of God is in this New Jerusalem. And he says, listen, it's not 120 stadia by 120 stadia. He says it's 12,000 stadia by 12,000 stadia. It's 2,300 kilometers by 2,300 kilometers, and it's 2,300 kilometers high. In other words, he's saying, look, it's 10,000 times bigger on the flat and 100 times bigger this way. In other words, you do the math, and I think God is saying, listen, my kingdom is 1,000,000 times better than Babylon. Why would you be sucked into Babylon? Why would you be sucked into following the world when you could follow my kingdom? My kingdom is so much better. Listen, I know that there are people who look at the harlot and they say, oh, it's the Roman Catholic Church. It's the European Union. It's North America. It's some sort of new world religion that's going to go all around the world, and it's going to be ruled by the Antichrist for a 7-year period called the Great Tribulation in the future. And my guttural response to that stuff these days is, who cares? Like, who cares? I mean, really, do we really think that God had John see this vision and write it down, and it had nothing to do with these 7 churches? It had no message for them or the people of the last 2,000 years. It was all about cracking a code and figuring out that the Antichrist is Obama or Trump or the president of Turkey, and that the mark of the beast is a biochip that's going to be under your skin, and that the harlot is the Roman Catholic Church or the European Union, and the locusts that rose up were B-29 bombers, and the stars that fell from the sky are nuclear warheads. Like, really, what would the point have been? That God at the end would be able to say, see, I told you I was right. And those who were really smart could figure out my code. But it was only intended for those about 2,000 or 2,500 years from when I wrote it. And the people had no clue. Like, really, do we really think that's what this is? I don't think so. I do not think that the book of Revelation is a crystal ball telling us the future. I might be wrong, and you might hold a different opinion, and I respect that. But for where I'm landing, it's not a crystal ball telling us the future. It's a mirror that we are to look in today. And every single believer that has read these passages and these words from the time they were written till today, it has appeared as a mirror. And it has got some really, 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 really important questions for you right today, right where you sit, right where you live. This is not something you can dismiss and say, well, someday this might be how it's going to turn out. I don't think you can escape these questions. And I think the questions are this: have you fallen for the seduction of the prostitute? Have you been seduced and drawn and allured away from your love relationship with God by the prostitute of the world? That's the question. I think this is a question that is, are you spiritually cheating on God, the lover of your soul? Are you, to put it really graphically, are you in bed with the world? Or are you following hard after God, even though it might cost you something? The revelation was a warning to those people, and I think it's a warning to us as well. And I think the questions are, when people look at you, what mark do they see on you? Do they see the mark of the beast on your thoughts and on your actions, that you act just like the rest of the world? Or do they see the mark of God and God's commands on your thoughts and on your actions? And where are you setting up house? Where are you living these days? Are you living in Babylon or are you living in Jerusalem? Because they're totally, totally different. The dragon and the pair of beasts are going down. They don't stand a chance against Jesus. The prostitute, the alluring prostitute of the world, she's going to be stripped and burned up, and she's going to be shown for who she really is. Babylon, the collective of those who oppose God, is essentially going to be thrown into the sea. In other words, I think Jesus is saying to John, John, I'm revealing the hidden to you. I'm showing you what's really going on behind the scenes. And we should realize that this is not all that bizarre. In fact, how many of us are familiar with Ephesians 6? Listen to this. It's so great. A final word. Be strong in the Lord and His mighty power. This is for today, right where you live. Put all of God's armor on so that you will be able to stand firm against the strategies of the devil. For we are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world that in Revelation God is showing us a picture of. Against mighty powers in this dark world and against evil spirits in the heavenly places. That's the battle you fight today. That's the battle you fight today. So how does this work itself out in the relevant, in the practical, right where you sit, not 2,000 years from now, but right where you sit today? What does this mean? Well, I think it's pretty simple. I think it means that every decision you are faced with, you're going to have two options. This last week, every day of this last week, I believe you had 20, 30, 40 decisions to make. Throughout this day today, you're going to have 20, 30, 40 decisions to make. Tomorrow, 20, 30, 40 decisions to make. Every one of those decisions is going to come with two options. You are going to have a lamb option and a seductive harlot option. You're going to have a Babylon option and you're going to have a Jerusalem option. You're going to have somebody in white inviting you into purity and holiness, and you're going to have a seductive harlot who's there to trick you and to entice you to come away from God and rather to follow her ways. I think every one of these, you're going to have this decision to make. And the question is, as you're sitting there and you've got that mouse in your hand, or you've got that remote control in your hand, or you've got your smartphone in your hand, or you've got that debit machine in your hand, or you've got that thought forming in your mind, or those words forming on your lips, you're going to be faced with those two options. Which one are you going to take? One will be an on-road, an off-ramp to Jerusalem. The other is going to be an off-ramp to Babylon. And I think every one of those decisions is going to be an opportunity to either follow the world or follow Jesus Christ. And I think the revelation is simply an opportunity to reveal the hidden forces and the consequences of our decision and to show us how it works behind the scenes. To say, hey, for Jesus to say, I do not want you experiencing judgment without the covering of me on you. So choose me. Choose to follow after me. Choose to live your whole life fully devoted to me. That's the mirror that you are looking at as you read Revelation. And it's a mirror you walk out of these worship communities with. And so who are you going to follow? Let's pray. God, I'll say it again. I don't know if we got any of this right today. It's such a bizarre exercise to interpret these things that are 67 generations, 2,000 years old. But I kind of sense that if we're motivated to love Jesus more, and we're motivated to follow you more in our thoughts and our actions, if we're motivated to worship you with every one of our little micro decisions throughout the day, then maybe we got something right. So God, whatever you're going to do with the future, you're going to do, but I pray that today you would find so many people across our worship communities just saying, I want to follow Jesus. I want to live. I do not want to look at this world as if she's irresistible, but I want to fight that. And I want to follow Jesus with everything that's in me. God, I pray that you would give us power and understanding to do that. In Jesus' name, and all the people said, Amen. God bless you. Those of you at the warehouse and fire hall and Churchill, I'm going to release you to your service host right now.